So next, I am going to introduce the team, the global team, that is going to talk to us about the Global Search and Rescue Initiative, finding every individual globally living with Angelman syndrome and why that matters. One announcement I just want to quickly make is that, unfortunately, Dr. Jim Wilson's flight was canceled, but he's coming. But he is going to give his talk tomorrow morning at 9:15 because he's not getting until late tonight. So we're just going to switch. And this is later this afternoon, but I just wanted everyone to know if you're kind of adjusting what talks you're coming to. He'll be speaking tomorrow morning at 9:15, and Jennifer Panagoulias in the 9:15 slot from tomorrow morning, who will be talking on clinical trials and clinical trials for families. She's going to speak actually before the panel discussion later this afternoon. So those are basically going to switch, but she's going to be going after the talk on the fireside chat with Alana and Ryan. So we're going to send an email around it, but if anyone was organizing their day around either of those talks today or tomorrow, I just wanted to let you know. So Amelia Beatty, Meagan Cross, and Isabel, if you guys can come up and just briefly introduce yourselves and your associations. Obviously, you're all part of the FAST initiative and the Search and Rescue initiative, but I just want you to be able to talk about yourselves. Thank you. Backward, laser. Forward, backward, laser.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Meagan Cross. I'm on the board of directors for the FAST US board and also the chairperson of FAST Australia. Thanks for coming to listen to this today. What I want to do is give you a bit of an overview of the FAST Search and Rescue Initiative, what the problem is and why we're trying to solve it, and some potential solutions. So we talk about the prevalence of Angelman syndrome being 1 in 15,000. And where does that come from? It comes from a research paper back in 2013 that talked about it being somewhere between 1 in 12,000 and 1 in 24,000. So we've adopted this 1 in 15,000, but we really don't know because we don't have a large-scale database that collects information. And we don't have a diagnostic registry in countries that can tell us every time someone's born, this is how many people have Angelman syndrome. And more recently in Australia, there was a paper published. Can you hear me? Yeah. A paper published that suggested it was more like 1 in 8,000. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a flick through of what that looks like. So 1 in 12,000 is about 666,000 around the world. 333,000 with 1 in 24, 500,000, which is what we often talk about. But if it was 1 in 8,000, we're looking at around 1 million people around the world with Angelman syndrome. So there's quite a difference. And why is it important? It's important because parents, we're hearing today about all the therapeutics in development, right from the clinic back through to early stages of development. And as a parent, I know all of you here today want access to those trials when they come near you. When drugs are approved, we want access to the treatments. And we want to understand the pipeline. That's why we're all here, right? And it's also really important to access that patient-centred care. We're really, really lucky as a rare disease to have something like this paper that was published earlier this year. And there's some really well-known names. Some of them are in the room that are part of this paper. And we often joke as parents that we don't have a guidebook on how to manage our kids, and this is probably as close as you can get. If you don't have a diagnosis of Angelman syndrome, you don't have access to this. So we've got patient-centred care, and we've also got access to community, locally and globally. So we know how much we value that. If you're isolated in a country and you don't know about us, you don't have access to it. You also get the ability to participate actively in your child's care and their future. So you're able to advocate because you understand the diagnosis that your child has. And for industry partners, it's important that they gain understanding to the population and the incidence or the prevalence where the global population resides. So I talked about that study in Australia earlier of 1 in 8,000. We also anticipate there's an underdiagnosis problem, and why I suspect that, and that's a global problem. In Australia, we have access to a disability insurance scheme, and you're able to get funding because you have Angelman syndrome. In Australia, we know of about 500 cases of Angelman syndrome. We should have closer to 2,000. So there's a lot of kids around there that need therapies, they need access to community, they want to be part of trials, but they don't know their kid has Angelman syndrome, and that's quite devastating if you think about it. And as you can see by the three of us here, it is truly a global effort, and Alison announced this initiative, I think, on International Angelman Day earlier in the year. And since then, we've been working with clinicians, researchers, geneticists, neurologists to advance this project. We know the first stage of it is to collate data on already existing cases with Angelman syndrome. So put it all into one central place. And then we need to develop initiatives to address that underdiagnosis. So we have the Global Angelman Syndrome Registry, and it's important to know that if you're already in the registry, we're already counting you in search and rescue. If you don't know if you are, we're on the table at the back. I'm wearing a bright shirt. You can come and find us and find out. But we already have 1,865 people, many more from today, that are already counted in search and rescue in 83 different countries. So we need to grow that from 1,865 to, 500,000 would be really nice. It's easy to register. It takes about 1 minute. We can guide you through it outside. It's translated into 5 different languages. We have a data curator that can help with queries and requests. She can provide reporting to patient organisations that partner with us, and we'll talk about that a bit later. This platform has medical grade security and ethics. And like I mentioned, you're already counted if you're in the registry. And I'll hand over to Isabel.
Hi, my name is Isabel. I'm part of the board of FAST LatAm, or Latin America, and I'm very excited to be here with you today. This initiative is very dear to my heart, and I'm going to tell you why. So on this slide, you can see all the different logos of the organizations globally that have already joined the Search and Rescue Initiative. And you can also see flags of all the countries that have already joined our initiative. I'm going to be reading the flags to you, if I can get them on the notes, or maybe not, because there are so many by now that it's quite hard to memorize them all. But let me see, how can I get the notes from the, how can I see the notes from the, here, the next one. Okay, can you just scroll a little bit down so I can see the, there we go. So here you can see we've reached out to 90 countries and received information from many, many countries. And apart from the organizations that you can see on the slides that have joined, such as Spain, Guatemala, New Zealand, Italy, US, UK, France, Tunisia, China, Latin America. So here we have Chile, Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina, and Germany, Australia, Czech Republic, India, Canada. I hope I didn't miss any. So apart from those, the flags are for Bolivia, Cuba, Ecuador, El Salvador, Indonesia, Jordan, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Panama, Peru, Pakistan, Qatar, Romania, South Africa, United Arab Emirates, and Uruguay, and just negotiating Malaysia since last night. So, thank you. Okay, so this map represents the data we already have on the Angelman population from the registry. And in the darker colors, you can see where we have more people registered. And so in the gray areas, we have no representation. So especially mostly Africa, we're still missing, and some parts of Asia and some parts of Latin America, we're still missing. So here you can see the population density of the general global population. So you can see China and India are the countries with most people globally. And so we were looking at the top 8 countries by world population that should account for almost 215,000 people with Angelman syndrome. And since in general we estimate there are about 500,000 globally, that means about half. So these countries are China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Nigeria, Brazil, and Bangladesh. And out of these countries, 4 have Angelman organizations, which is China, US, India, and Brazil. And we already have ambassadors for Indonesia, Pakistan, Nigeria, and Bangladesh. And one more. Yeah, so Nigeria as well. So we're very excited. So really from this whole list, I'm only missing now an ambassador from Bangladesh. So if anyone from Bangladesh is listening or watching, please reach out to us. So I'm going to be sharing some community stories, and I'm going to start with our own. So we live in Guatemala, and when we started realizing that our second child, was not meeting his milestones, of course we were distressed as a family, and the odyssey started. And only once we got a diagnosis, I felt better, yes? So before that, I felt alone and lost, but once we had a diagnosis, I was able to reach out to the international community, and I was able to reach out to FAST and ASF and go to those conferences. And for me, that made such an amazing difference in how I felt. And that knowledge empowered me, knowing that, okay, there is help, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Now I know how I can help my child with, tips like for augmentative and alternative communication and just dealing with the daily needs of life better. So for me, being part of this community was life-changing. So I'm going to share with you also the Costa Rica story. Costa Rica is a beautiful country in Central America, and it has the best public health system in the region. It has a population of 5 million people. But guess what? We only know of one Angelman family right now. And this is why it is so important to have our global search and rescue initiative, because that cannot be. The Indonesia story. Indonesia is a beautiful country of 276 million people. They have no Angelman organization, and as of 1 week ago when we were submitting the presentation, we only had one known family. Guess what? 2 days ago, we got this beautiful picture of the Indonesia community, and now we have 11 families. So this is how quickly things can change. And the Guatemala story. So in Guatemala, we're a small Central American country. The only local genetic testing available at this time is the fish. And genetic testing abroad is possible, but it's expensive. And when we're talking about families with a minimum wage of $500 US a month, then sending genetic testing overseas for about $1,000 or more, just becomes a reality that's not going to happen. So these are the things we need to address, and this is why this initiative is so important. And now I'm handing over to Amelia. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Amelia Beatty I'm on the board of directors for FAST USA. So some things to consider within this initiative is the health landscape, of course. The access to testing means physical access, such as distance from testing facilities, but also affordability. What type of healthcare system the country has. Is it free to test, or do you have to pay out of pocket, which can be very expensive for families. We know that each country and even regions within countries will have different situations. Some will have patient organizations and some will not, as Isabel pointed out. Some countries have public health accessible to all with comprehensive genetic testing. In these countries, the question is more, how long does it take to access this testing? Also, the types of testing available. Can they test for mutations, for example? Do tests need to be sent outside of the country? All of these things are important to ask and think about. This whole process can take many months, or in the case of FAST President Alana Newhouse, it took her son years to be diagnosed. And then when we have many countries where public health does not offer more than a basic emergency care. In these countries, testing may be offered by labs, but the families will, again, have to pay everything out of pocket, and this is very expensive. Because of the cost of testing, many will never get a formal genetic diagnosis. Many countries offer only basic genetic testing like FISH or methylation, but they don't offer testing for other genotypes like mutation, other than deletion. Second point, the existing methods of data. Some countries have health records, and Meagan talked a little bit about this, that may help us understand more the diagnosis incidence, such as ICD codes, insurance records, diagnostic databases. And then of course, and I think this is very important, cultural considerations. In some countries there can be certain stigma attached to having a child with a disability, and that can be a real hindrance for families to pursue testing or a diagnosis. Pathways to diagnosis. We can look to the diagnosed population for clues to those who are not yet diagnosed. The Global Angelman Syndrome Registry, GASR, can help us to understand the pathways to diagnosis. In a 2021 paper using GASR data, they analyzed how a diagnosis was reached on a global scale, looking at things like age at diagnosis, signs leading to diagnosis, and who made the diagnosis. As we collect more data, we can start to analyze on a country-by-country basis to give us more clues as to where to look for undiagnosed cases. We want to stress again that this is a global collaborative effort. Search and rescue partners will update us on the regional landscape of their area and also share any existing data collections. They will also introduce regional experts and educate local families on the initiative. And then the search and rescue team will share a handbook to guide partners, as well as marketing materials and points for advocacy. Our project stages. First, collecting and reporting on known cases. We want to be able to record individuals that are already known to the patient organizations through our global partners. This is most likely the easiest part of the ambitious project. Second, the search and rescue will use the Global Angelman Syndrome Registry to understand the known incidence at a country level. And thirdly, of course, we will work with partners, the Angelman syndrome organizations around the world, and our search and rescue ambassadors in countries where there is no Angelman syndrome organization, in order to find those who are not yet diagnosed. What can you do? The search and rescue website that you see here is live, so check out the website, and parents sign up for the initiative. Again, at angelmansearchandrescue.org. So just to know, if your loved one with Angelman syndrome is already in the Global Angelman Syndrome Registry, they have already been counted in this initiative, so you do not need to sign up for search and rescue. And if you're not sure if your loved one with Angelman syndrome is in the registry, in the Global Angelman Syndrome Registry, you can check at the desk just to make sure. What else can you do? Share about search and rescue with other Angelman parents, with physicians, clinicians, therapists, and schools. And again, become a search and rescue ambassador for those families who do not have an Angelman syndrome organization in your country. So please email us if you're interested in becoming a search and rescue ambassador in your area. And we just want to say thank you. So why is the search and rescue initiative important? First, because knowing prevalence helps attract drug makers globally, and that's something that Craig Martin also spoke about this morning. 2, you need a diagnosis in order to receive specialized care and eventually a treatment. And then 3, because having community is so important. So here's our email address and our website. So please check us out and feel free and email us if you have any questions. Thank you.
We have time for a couple questions since you guys aren't going to be on the panel. Do you want to just see if there's any questions in the audience? Do you want to stay up there? Do we have any questions? Youngwee?
Well, first, thanks for the amazing international outreach efforts. It's very impressive. Back to the sort of genetic testing for other countries. Clearly, even this country is still not sufficient, and we dealing with this kind of frustration every week in this country. So realize that. Second is our wonderful international effort. Right now here, like you do the typically, if you have suspicion for Angelman, you do the methylation, you do the microarray, now you get a panel, you get a whole exon, you will pick it up for the UB3A or every genotype. But there is a technology, maybe Alan's already invested or discussed. So that's a nanopore technology, like one single testing cover every genotype. You actually can do it pretty much in a small hospital, small laboratory, even eventually you could do at your own laptop at home. So that probably is something to consider if you want to international other country. They couldn't buy the aluminum machine, but the nanopore, that's some kind of limitation right now, but that single testing cover all genotypes. That's common.
And is that something you buy at Walmart? That machine? Where do you get that?
The machine is literally only this, like the USB size.
And they send it to my home address in Manhattan, New York, and then I can run the test for everybody? So we need nano testing. It's free.
I think, Dr. Chang, you're signed up to help us. So
you want to join the initiative? You can help us.
I think that sounds great. I was just thinking earlier when you were talking about the neonatal testing, right? I was just doing the math, and I was thinking, in Latin America, in Mexico, we have over 100 kids every year born with Angelman syndrome. And then you add that up with Colombia and Argentina and Chile, and within like 3 years, we're talking about really interesting numbers for pharma to come and work with us. So it's definitely, it can change the landscape substantially. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your insight into all that you're doing. It's really exceptional and it's very, very impressive. We are trying to do more or less the same with other neurodevelopmental diseases, and maybe I've been naive sometime, or my team has been naive, but Amelia was talking about cultural, and we are encountering the same, and sometimes it's very difficult. And something else that I was not expecting is stigma, but again, it really depends from the culture and the country. How do you face this, with the families? What is the advice that you can give us?
I think that's a great question, and I live in the Middle East, so this is something that I think about a lot from my experience, and I think it's something that we need to be really sensitive about, and I think education is really important within that, just educating families and physicians and communities that that everyone is important to a family, that everyone is important to a community, and everyone contributes differently. So I know our family living in Jordan, we are very proud of our son, Orion, who lives with Angelman syndrome, and we bring him with us, and he knows everyone in the neighborhood loves our Orion. So I think that this is very important, the education behind it, and just navigating that in a very culturally relevant way.
I'll pull this right down now. I might just add to that too, I hear clinicians say that a label isn't important, it's how you treat the person with their symptoms, but I think a label is really important, and what we presented today sort of shows the reasons why you want a label. There's a stigma around that label as well, right? So we need to move past that and say having a diagnosis enables you to do A, B and C.